The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Luke. Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil.' He said to him, 'Take your bill, sir. Sit down quickly and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'And how much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat. And he said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager, because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much, and whoever is dishonest in very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise you, Lord Christ.
Our Old Testament lesson and our Gospel today have a common Episcopal theme to them. And that theme is the way of worship is the way of belief. Or put more succinctly perhaps, that our worship expresses what we believe. Or perhaps at a deeper level, who and what we worship determines who and what we become. It's easy to see that in the first lesson from Amos. You see, a merciful God has brought the children of Israel out of bondage in Egypt and brought them into a new community, and they worship this merciful God and become merciful themselves. That is exactly what following the commandments means in this case. You become a merciful person, a caring, loving person when you follow these commandments. Now, the time of Amos, though, is after they've come into the settled land and everything is going wonderfully. Prosperity and peace are everywhere, and they have kind of lost focus on that merciful God. And as you can see, they can't wait for the Sabbath to get over so they can get back to making money by being dishonest with the poor. And this is exactly the opposite of what they should be doing. When they're worshiping a merciful God, the poor are always included. The poor and the vulnerable are the focus of things, because once you treat them right, then you got it right. And Amos rails against them and calls them back to a merciful God. Now, the gospel says the same thing, but I know that it's not something that you thought of when you read that gospel. That's a very confusing gospel because of all the stuff added at the end. And it seems to be commending this dishonest behavior. Saying that it's okay if you're in a tough spot, But let me kind of explain this gospel by comparing it to the parable that comes right before it. The parable that Jesus tells before this parable is the parable of the prodigal son. And if you look at that parable, you begin to see what this parable today is trying to tell us. Think about it. The prodigal son squanders his father's property and goes to a far country. In this parable, this manager, this steward, squanders his master's property and is dismissed from his job. In the prodigal son ends up feeding the pigs, which is the lowest possible job for a Jewish person. I mean, it's at the bottom of the rung. He's reached his limits. And in this gospel today, the steward takes an accounting of where he is and realizes he can't do anything else. Nothing. And presumptively, you could say, well, he's going to be feeding the pigs pretty soon too. In the prodigal son story, the parable says that this man comes to his senses and he realizes that he would be better off being a servant in his father's house than where he is now. And so he places his trust in the mercy of his father and goes back home. And he seeks forgiveness. And what he discovers is a mercy he can hardly even understand, because he is not coming back as a servant. His father absorbs all the humiliation that he has received from this son leaving and all the property that he has lost, and he allows this son to become a son again, and he throws a party for him. Now, in the parable today, as Middle Eastern scholar Kenneth Bailey puts it, this steward finds out something quite important about his master. You see, he is dismissed from his job, but he is not jailed. According to the Mishnah of that time, the laws of the day, anybody that squanders somebody's property is to be brought before a judge, and if you can't pay it all back, you're supposed to be put into jail. He notices this quality of mercy in this rich man, and he places his whole life and bets his whole life on that quality of mercy. If he fails, he'll be jailed, but if he succeeds, he'll be riding high in a new community. You see what'll happen? He goes and reduces the price that these people owe and asks them to pay that lower price. Now, how are they going to think about that? How are the tenants going to react to that? They're going to love this steward. They're not only going to love the steward, they're going to love the master, the man, the rich owner. Oh, how generous this man is for reducing the price. You see what's happening? All of this is spreading around the community, as Bailey would say. So when the master comes to meet this steward, he has two choices. He can tell the tenants that this man was not in his employ when this was happening, and so they owe that money, which means they're going to be quite angry with him. Or he can accept the loss, and he can receive the praise of the community for being a generous man and let the tenant or let the steward ride high in the community. He reflects on it a minute, and then he says, "You're a very wise man." The word shrewd there in Greek can equally mean wise. You see what's happening? He is allowing him to see that It is the quality of mercy that saves us. It is this mercy, opening up to this mercy, that allows us to be creative and be wise in what we're doing, because we base everything on that quality of mercy. As I would say, or as many people say, it's not about doing it right. It's about doing it wrong. Because when you do it wrong, you know it's not you doing it. It's God in you that helps you move past it. I took a course in alcoholism while I was in seminary because it was such a problem in my home parish or other parishes that I'd been in. And we had an opportunity to interview people who were recovering alcoholics and listen to their story of frustration, of trying to stop drinking themselves, and had all kinds of ways and so forth. And it was usually when they reached some sort of bottom for them that they began to realize they couldn't do it. They couldn't save themselves. They couldn't get out of that addiction by themselves. And they began to allow the God within them to encourage them to move out of it and to help them to come out of it. It's only when we move into that right brain where the soul can be resourced that we can come out of those kinds of addictions. And it's not just about us doing it wrong, it's about people doing things wrong to us. That allows us to. When everything's going along real well, you don't need anybody. You don't need God. Everything's going great. It's only when things aren't going great that we access that greater part of us, that God within us, that brings us into a new life together. Martin Luther King is a good example. He's a lot like Amos, you know. He was calling us back to worshiping a merciful God, which means that we would become merciful and include everybody. And we were not including everybody. Racism was raising its head, and it was really hurting people of color. And he paid the price for it. And I remember the story about the night or the day that his home in Montgomery was bombed. And the next day, the next morning, he was sitting at the kitchen table, worried, fearful, wasn't sure if he was doing the right thing because the resistance was so enormous. And he said he heard this voice that said, "Martin, do not be afraid. Martin, do not be afraid." And he said, from that time on, I was not afraid, because he knew that God was with him. It's in those difficult times that this voice of God, this voice of connection, this voice of love and mercy comes to us so that we can re-enter into a life together. I can't think of a better example than 9/11, which we celebrated the 15th anniversary last week. 9/11 was an overwhelming situation for us all, but especially for those people who lived there and the first responders that went there, and the courage we saw and the people coming together that we saw was just unprecedented. I remember the story about the first crane operator that went in that night. He said that everything was a mess. It was dust everywhere, and it was like going into this cloud of unknowing. He said, the only thing I could think of was, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." And he said he kept saying it, and he kept moving forward. And he found the crane he was supposed to operate. And he said there was no manager there. There was no people telling anybody what to do, but everybody worked together. He said people came out of everywhere, nowhere, and they were moving stuff as soon as he got started. There's something about the left brain, the ego, the calculating self, that we depend upon every day. And we depend upon it so much that it becomes our God. It becomes the one that controls everything. But when things don't go right and that brain can't figure it out, we realize that there's something more in us, that God is in us, calling us to a new life together, calling us to be merciful like God is merciful. This is what brings us into a new life together. This is what this service is about. It is about helping us to get in touch with receiving God in our lives so that we can be like God in the world, to be merciful like God is merciful, to be people of steadfast love that care about each other so that we become a community that rises above all that happens. And we call that